Amen. If you're here last week, we started our series on Psalm 51, which is called Renewed. We spoke about David and Bathsheba, okay? And I just want to recap because I know not everybody was here and some of you have missed it. But David and Bathsheba, there's this temptation spiral. And it was actually quite a good discussion with one or two of the staff this last week because we were speaking about temptation. And one of the things I just want to be very clear is, doesn't matter whether you're on the path that God is calling you or the path that where you've chosen your own way. Temptation still comes to both, all the time. But however, if you're going to fall in temptation, it's more likely when you're in the path that God has not called you to. You understand that? You know, when we start to make our own decision, temptation comes. I mean, the reason why we have these records of temptation in Scripture is because normally the person has gone their own way. And then they fall into temptation. I'm just going to recap a little bit on 2 Samuel 12 before we get into Psalm 51 this morning. But I didn't read this last week, but I want to just tell you what happened at the end of the story. Because we end off with David and Bathsheba, and then Nathan comes up to him. Nathan the prophet comes up to David, and he has this great story. He goes up to David the king, and he tells him the story. He says there were two men. The one man was very rich, and the other man was very poor. I mean, the one man had sheep and cattle, and he had all these things, but there's this poor man, and he only had one beloved lamb, a small little lamb. In fact, he used to share his food with it. It used to drink from his cup. It even slept in his arms. And at that stage, you normally go, oh, okay, oh, cute, man. It was his love thing. Then he continues with the story. He says, one night the rich man had a guest. And so what he did was he went and he took the poor man's only beloved lamb and he ate it with his guest. Done and dusted. They finished the whole thing. Verse 5 in 2 Samuel 12, verse 5, it says, David burned with anger against the man and said to Nathan, as surely as the Lord lives, the man who did this must die. He must pay for that lamb 4 times over because he did such a thing and had no pity. I'd love to have seen Nathan's face round about then. The irony. Because what David has just said is true and just. Verse 7 is such a powerful line. Then Nathan turned around to David and said, you are that man. You are that man. So out of this encounter, David writes Psalm 51. As he reflects on this time where he gets confronted with the sin. As he stands before God and he writes this. Psalm 51 verse 1. Have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love. According to your great compassion, blot out my transgression. Wash away all my iniquity and cleanse me from my sin. For I know my transgressions, and my sin is always before me. Just to there, that's where we're reading this morning. That last line in this part of the psalm really always gets me. My sin is always before me. I remember I sat as a young adult, fresh out of school. I was busy studying, and I sat with this verse because I felt God was leading me into ministry. And the reason I didn't want to go into ministry was because of this verse. This was my verse about why I couldn't go into ministry. My sin is always before me. This was my no, I cannot do, God. Because if God really knew me, He would never use me. If we're honest with ourselves, many of us believe the same. If God really knew me, He'd never use me. My sin is always before me. So this morning, I want to remind us about what sin does to you. As we go into the series, we work with the psalm right up into Easter. What sin does to you. Because often we actually don't understand it. We're in the midst of it. David didn't understand it until Nathan came to him and confronted him with what he had been doing wrong. You see, you can only understand sin when you are aware of it. In the moment, David is oblivious until Nathan confronts him. C.S. Lewis said this. He says, when a man is getting better, he understands more clearly that evil is still left in him. When a man is getting worse, he understands his own badness less and less. A moderately bad man knows he is not very good. A thoroughly bad man knows he is all right. A thoroughly bad man thinks he is all right. This is common sense, really. You understand sleep when you are awake, not while you're sleeping. You can see mistakes in arithmetic when your mind is working properly. While you are making them, you cannot see them. You understand the nature of drunkenness when you are sober, not when you are drunk. Good people know about both good and evil. Bad people do not know about either. Sin, what it does to you. Now, this is not an easy topic, but I want us to hear what happens when we're tempted and we fall into sin. What happens when sin becomes part of our life? This is what David is talking of this morning. The first thing I want to tell you is this, and you must hear this out. Sin has an effect. Sin has an effect. Imagine for a moment there was a world where you didn't suffer consequences for your wrongdoing. Just imagine there were no consequences for when you did something that was wrong. There's actually an experiment. This is really cool. Really cool experiment. It was a controversial experiment. Maybe I shouldn't say it was cool. It's called the Milgram experiment, where what they did was they took students and they put a student down who the people didn't know, and they said, this person is a student, and you're going to mark their test for him. But every time they got a wrong answer, you'd ask a question. If they got it wrong, you would shock them. Eh? Sounds great. And the shock was delivered by these students. You know, there's a group of them, and every time the person got it wrong, they'd shock them. Okay, what they didn't know that it was an experiment. And what they did was they got an actor to sit and get shocked. Okay, so he acted as if he was getting shocked, but he wasn't getting really shocked. And they wanted to see the results. They wanted to see what would happen. When would they eventually stop? And of course, the actor was a really good actor. He would eventually start getting anxious and, sweating and did all these things. The results were this. Students continued to deliver shocks at the expense of another as it had no harm for themselves. They would keep on shocking the person because it had no consequence for them. I mean, when I read about this experience, I thought, duh, if that had been me, I would have been, even if you got it right. In fact, the other night we were at our kids' school. They were having an evening, games evening, and they had one of the teachers, and they gave you this thing which was wet and was quite heavy, and you had to throw it and hit this target. If you hit it, the teacher would get a bucket full of water on top of them. Okay, sounds fun, right? You know what my immediate reaction was? If I was at school, I wouldn't have been aiming at the target. I would have been aiming at the teacher. That was straight away. And then I spoke to somebody else, and they admitted the exact same thing. They said, if that had been them, they would have just gone straight for the teacher. Forget about trying to hit the bug. Let's see if we can hit the teacher. I mean, it's part of our human nature sometimes. Sin has an effect. You walk past a broken glass window. A window, and there's a part of you that doesn't want to see it like that the entire time. See, when sin has no effect, it has no boundary. So God actually promises something, and this is what's actually said to David. It's prophesied over his house in 2 Samuel 12, 10 to 12. It says, trouble will come upon the house of David. And we see after David, there's quite a few things. There's the rape of Tamar. There's Absalom's murders of Ammon. There's Absalom's revolt against David. And we almost see this fulfillment against David, that there is an effect of sin. David's sin affected his household. Now, a lot of people will argue whether God ordered them or is it flowed. But one of the things is, I know many people have asked me this, what is when you recur the sins of the father? This is actually one of the examples. His kids bore the consequence of his sin. And it's rooted in Galatians 5, that David's behavior and human psychology actually set a pattern for his family, that his kids would do that to him. Galatians 6 says, you reap what you sow, so do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please their flesh, from the flesh will reap destruction. And whoever sows to please the Spirit, from the Spirit will reap eternal life. Sin has an effect. I'm going to ask this question. What seeds are you sowing in your life? What seeds are you sowing in the lives of those around you? Do you treat evil with evil? So I tell you now, you're sowing a seed in that moment. Gossip, you're sowing a seed into somebody else's life. When you do that under-counter deal, you're sowing a seed that will bear fruit, and you will eat of that fruit. Sin will always come out. Galatians makes a promise there. Whoever sows to please the flesh from the flesh will reap destruction. And David sees this. This is what sin does. Sin will make you a slave. Sin becomes a habit or an addiction. You know, when Cain kills Abel, God comes to him, so he lies to cover. He uses a smaller sin to cover a bigger sin. David not only commits adultery, then he goes on to murder. Abraham lies about Sarah, where he says, no, this isn't my wife, this is my sister, and Pharaoh takes her as his wife. He does the same thing to Amalek, where he lies. I want to tell you now, sin will make you a slave. Time and time again. Sin will only enslave you and never free you. This is what sin does. Sin will normalize you. Now, there's an interesting, I don't know if anybody knows anything about the cuckoo bird. Any bird? There are some birders in the house. Anybody know anything about the cuckoo bird? So the cuckoo bird, if you don't know this, it doesn't make a nest. Okay? And it doesn't rear its young. You know what it does? It goes and lays an egg in another nest that's already been made. And if that other bird doesn't recognize it, that other species doesn't see that this is a foreign egg, they will look after the egg. The cuckoo babies will then hatch, and it will raise them as if it's its own. They will do all the hard work. They will do all the hard work. The cuckoo bird becomes amalgamated with that family. Sin will normalize itself. And you know what? We live in a world where all sin wants to do is normalize itself in your life. Create the gray areas, rationalize it, make it more palatable. And this one really struck me because I hadn't thought of it, but when I was reading up and just looking at it, it really struck me that there's some things we should be upset about because it's not as God intended this world to be. Death is one of those things. Death is a result of sin. Romans 3 verse 23, the wages of sin is death. But yet, we often go, death is part of normal life, right? We forget that death is actually the consequence of sin. Sin coming into the world. And yet we normalize it. We live as if it should be. We should be. And it's why we are devastated, even when we understand that it's a normal process of life. You know, you don't die, you pass away. Church, I want to remind us that there's many ways in which sin has been normalized into our lives as if it's how things should be. And God says it's not as I created it to be. Sin will normalize itself. It will be like that cuckoo egg being laid inside your nest and will grow up and you'll think it's your own and you'll love it as if it's your own and was never intended for your life. Denial of sin is another consequence. We rationalize wrongdoing. The world is so messed up that it has to come up with ways to make sense of the world. How often do we just go, I'm having a bad day. Or they don't know better. In fact, the modern version, I was looking for a modern version of Psalm 51. If Psalm 51 was written today, what would the words be? And then what the words came up were? And there were many different little changes in them. But all of them had this one word. God, in your boundless compassion, wash away my mistakes, my failures. I've said this before and I'm saying it again. Church, we need to realize that the world calls sin a mistake. It's not a mistake. Scripture does not say that when you make a mistake, I didn't know any better. Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't know that I shouldn't go down there. And so I went down there without any knowledge and I got caught out. I'm sorry for that. That's what a mistake is. Sin, if we're honest with ourselves, is something we choose. It's a battle we have to fight every single day. It's willful and can only be dealt with when we realize. Now you may be sitting here thinking, but sin in the world, how do we then hold them to a standard they don't even know about? C.S. Lewis in Mere Christianity talks about the moral law. And he uses this example. He says, no matter where you go, no matter what the age, whether you're in an old age home, whether you're in the workplace, or if you're at the playground, the arguments, if you listen to them, are actually all the same. Arguments are, you stole my place. I got here first. It's my parking. I was sitting here, you took my spot, or you pushed in. The arguments are always the same. You must give me some of your food, I gave you some of mine. I was really good to you in that deal, so you need to do this and that deal. He says the crazy thing is this, is that when somebody has a grievance, the other person automatically knows what they're talking about. I don't know if you've noticed that. Two little kids fighting about food because the one took this and the other one took that. There's no discussion, about whether it's right or wrong. They're already on the same playing field. He says it's crazy that no one denies that there is this moral code. In fact, we get upset because we expect everybody to have the same moral code. No, you don't push in. I was waiting here. I've done my time. I've waited. I was here first, not you. You've taken this. And every single time, people from totally different backgrounds can get to the same place and they'll argue in the same way. He says we never ever fight with the laws of nature. Nobody argues with gravity, right? If I pick you up and let go and you fall to the ground, you don't get up and say, but gravity, you shouldn't have done that. That was wrong. Don't you know that you should hold me up a little bit longer? You don't get cross with gravity or expect to argue with it. You don't even argue with biology. I mean, a hot coal on your skin burns. You're not going to go, you shouldn't burn me. That's just not the right thing to do. But the moral law is different because we assume and expect that it exists no matter where we go, anywhere in the world. It's why we don't glorify selfish people. Do you know when somebody takes everything for themselves, they take it away from us, we get cross. You can't do that. Because they're breaking a moral code. Because if we go take their stuff, they're going to get cross with us, but you can't do that. Who sets those rules and boundaries? And I'm not going to go into that today. It's as if everybody knows what is unjust in the world. David gets furious with the man who took the poor man's lamb in Nathan's story. Yet he was in denial of the very same sin he committed in taking Uriah's wife. Think of that for a moment. Self-deceit is what happens when we deny the sin in ourselves. So eventually, the train will come. Sin will make us self-centered. I've touched on that a little bit. You become the focus. Everything is about you. Your wants, your desires, your needs. Do yourself a favor, count how many times you are selfish in the week to come. Where you think about yourself first. Do it at home, just at home. You put others before yourself. If you do not think you're selfish, you're in denial. For David is he got what he wanted, but he never considered Bathsheba losing her husband. Restless. Sin will never be satisfied with some. It wants all. Listen to that statement. Sin will never be satisfied with some. It wants all. It wants everything. It corrupts until it is full, is insatiable. I love that word. In other words, it's never satisfied. Proverbs 13 verse 4. says a sluggard's appetite is never full, but the desires of the diligent are fully satisfied. Proverbs 27:20. Death and destruction are never satisfied, and neither are human eyes. There's once an alleged question which was asked, how much money does it take to satisfy a man? To which John D. Rockefeller responded, just a little more. This is what sin does. And David, in these opening lines, writes the consequences of what he's going through. This is what sin has done. It has vast reaching, and I haven't even touched on your relationship with others, your inability to love. But David comes to God. He comes to God and he says this. In the midst of as he sits and he wallows, as he realizes all the things that are happening, listen to what he says to God. He says, have mercy. Because God is one who brings mercy. I mean, he could have tried to make it right in so many different ways. We'll come to that in next week. The only place we have mercy and that it can be given is at the foot of the cross. He appeals to God's unfailing love. True love that loves you too much to leave you the way you are. True love that loves you too much to leave you the way you are. God is not one to leave us in a sin. He draws us out of darkness into light. And He's continually doing that. Lord, your unfailing love, according to your great compassion, God left heaven for you. And He uses these words, blot out, wash, and cleanse. God, forget. Blot out, let no one else see it, what I have done, because it is hideous. Wash over, like a balm that comes over, that sets the disruption within your heart, the restlessness, and settles it. Cleanse. He says these things because his sin is always right before him. So this morning, I pray that you will, this next week, continue just reading Psalm 51 over and over again. Ask God, search me, convict me, show me. David calls upon the attributes of God as a last-ditch resort, because he realizes what sin has done. Church, we need to take sin seriously. Because always it's about the forgiveness and the goodness, and we'll come to those things. But we need to take sin seriously in our lives. How we've brought it in and allowed it. We've grown it up. How we've sown these seeds that others will follow. We need to take sin seriously, and God even more so. Because if we're honest with ourselves, our sin is always before me. But there is hope. There is hope. But let's sit in this moment before God. Let's pray.